Imagine this. How would you react if your daughter spent over $200,000 on a European vacation lasting less than 2 weeks, using your credit account? And what if you found out she's been unemployed for the past 5 years? Sounds unbelievable, right? Exactly, it's as unbelievable as my own life. Let me tell you how this madness unfolded and what I did to teach my daughter a lesson about valuing money and being honest. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I was in my study sorting through old blueprints the way I always did. 3 precise folds, corners aligned, stacked by project. When my phone buzzed, it was a bank alert. My eyes skimmed it out of habit, but then I stopped. $185,900. Vendor: Ocean's Edge Luxury Resort. Location: Marbella, Spain. I stared at the number. That card was linked to the joint account I opened with Sienna last autumn. The one she begged for just to get caught up. She'd promised it was temporary. I remembered her exact words. "You won't even notice, Dad. I'll close it by spring." It was now August. I called her. She picked up on the second ring, sounding breathless. "Hey, Dad." "Sorry, can't talk long. Things are nuts at the firm. 3 presentations due this week." She was always quick, always smooth. But I didn't speak. I just listened. From the speaker came a faint splash, maybe waves and laughter, high-pitched, carefree. A man's voice called out, "Cian, don't forget the SPF this time." Then the line went dead. I didn't call back. I didn't leave a message. I opened my bank app, tapped the joint account, and hit the freeze button. It made a soft click like a lock sliding into place. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just stood up, walked into the kitchen, and turned the kettle on. 20 minutes later, I was at my desk with my tea and a small stack of printed transactions. Speedboat rentals, exclusive spa retreats, something called Emerald Coast wine tasting. I highlighted each item in yellow and slipped the pages into a labeled folder. August misappropriation. That night I didn't sleep much, not from anger, just from the weight of a quiet realization. It wasn't just about the money. She was never going to stop unless I did. So the next morning I opened a second folder, marked it Freeze Protocol, and began listing every account that still had her name on it. There were more than I remembered. By noon the next day, Sienna texted a photo of a half-eaten gourmet salad on a white plate captioned, "Lunch at my desk, back-to-back client calls. Hope you're getting some rest, Dad." She added a smiling emoji with sweat on its brow. I stared at the message, then at my computer screen. The timing was uncanny. Just 30 minutes earlier, I'd opened Jace's public story. He must have forgotten I still followed his account, or perhaps he didn't care. There she was, my daughter, in a sky blue linen dress, raising a cocktail glass poolside. His caption read, "Earned every drop after a long, hard vacation." The clip panned to her laughing carefree as a waiter placed another plate of fresh oysters beside her drink. I didn't get angry. I just felt smaller, a little more invisible. I scrolled back through the last week of posts. Jet skis, a yacht brunch matching white robes with Ocean's Edge embroidered in gold thread. It wasn't one careless charge. It was a whole lifestyle, bought on a card that had my name on it. I opened the banking portal again and printed the full August statement, highlighted the transactions: spa for 2, vintage champagne at check-in, a designer watch store I didn't recognize. I sorted them by date, then by type. Travel, dining, luxury, and totaled the damage. It was nearly $15,000 in 1 week. I'd raised Sienna to know better, but knowing better and doing better weren't always the same. I added those pages to the August misappropriation folder. Then I walked to the back of the house and opened the old chest I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the trust documents from after Celeste died. I had kept everything. Power of attorney, deed records, access authorizations. Sitting on the floor, I flipped through the oldest file, one labeled Initial Trust Design Contingency Structure. My own handwriting stared back at me, firm and deliberate. I didn't realize I was smiling until I reached for the pen. It was almost dusk when I sat at the kitchen table, that old cedar folder beside me, and allowed myself to remember just how far this had gone. After Celeste died, the silence in the house became unbearable. Sienna was 32 at the time, freshly laid off, bitter at the world, but still sweet to me in moments. She'd moved back in for just a few months to regroup. I cooked, cleaned, paid the bills. I told myself it was a blessing. At least I had company again. When she said she wanted to launch a digital marketing agency, I believed in her. She had the charisma, the charm, the shine, but none of the planning. I restructured the loan on our quiet cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains to give her seed money. Our quiet retreat that Celeste and I built one summer with savings from a double tax return. Sienna never asked whose name was on the deed. She just thanked me and took the check. Then came the luxury car loan, then the app developer, then the shortfall on her taxes. I kept thinking, if I help now, it'll pay off later. She'll get stable, she'll stand on her own. But each time I gave, she leaned harder, and every time she promised it was the last ask. It never was. I drained nearly 2/3 of my pension in 3 years quietly without telling anyone. When Jace wanted to open his boutique gym, I co-signed a lease. When they said their rent was too high, I helped with the down payment on a condo. My name's still on the papers, but always called Sienna's Place. No one knew what I was giving up. Not my poker buddies, not Nolan, not even the barber who always asks how the golden girl is doing. I stared at the spreadsheet I'd made tonight, listing every transfer and temporary loan from the past 5 years. It didn't look like love anymore. It looked like theft disguised as gratitude. The only consolation was that I had tracked it all, and soon every number in that ledger would work in my favor. I called Nolan the next morning. His voice crackled through the line, crisp and unmistakable. "Still keeping your books neat, Lucian?" I told him I needed his eyes on something urgent. He didn't ask more, just said, "Come by after lunch. Bring everything." His office was quieter than I remembered. He'd pared back to part-time years ago. But his desk still had that same solid oak lamp we picked out together back when Celeste and I set up the estate. Nolan hadn't aged much except for the slight limp and a slowness when he rose to greet me. I placed the folders on his desk without a word. He opened the first one, adjusted his reading glasses, and began flipping. 20 minutes passed before he said anything. "You've documented everything." I nodded. "You've got receipts, account numbers, legal standing on the condo, the cabin, and the accounts." He tapped the second folder. "Joint accounts with you as primary, trusts where you're still the sole grantor." I never removed myself, I said softly, even when she asked. Nolan sat back. "So what do you want, Lucian? Retaliation? Restitution?" I looked at him. "I want to be free and I want to be done." He studied me for a long moment, then reached for his pen. "We'll start by freezing everything in your name. Lock the trust accounts, file for property control on the condo, and we'll revoke access to all linked cards immediately. It'll take a day or two to finalize." I handed him the updated spreadsheet. "There's more. Jace accessed the secondary trust last month without permission." Nolan's eyes sharpened. "Then we'll add misappropriation to the complaint. That'll make the court listen." I exhaled, not relief, but something steadier, like air returning to a sealed room. We worked in silence for another hour. By the time I left his office, a weight had shifted. For the first time in years, the numbers were finally on my side. That night I made tea and watched the screen door sway gently in the wind. Sienna would be back from Marbella tomorrow. Her key wouldn't work. Her access was gone. She came back 2 days later. I heard the wheels of her suitcase crunch across the gravel before I saw her. Through the sheer curtain, I watched as she reached for the keypad on the condo's front door. Her brow creased. She tried again, slower this time. The keypad blinked red. Then she tried her old key. Nothing. The banging came next. First soft, then louder, then the phone calls. 3 missed calls, then a voicemail. I didn't bother to open it. Finally, a text. "The accounts are frozen. What did you do?" 5 minutes later, she was at my door. "Dad?" she barked as I opened it. She was sunburnt and still wearing sandals. "Why the hell is the condo locked, and where's the money? I tried to get gas and my card got declined. What's going on?" I looked at her. Really looked. I met her eyes, steady and level. She looked inconvenienced by the consequences. "You should check your bank app," I said. She scoffed. "You froze it. Are you serious?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Silence does what shouting never can. It gives people room to hear their own guilt. She stepped forward. "You can't do this. It's illegal. I'm your daughter." I met her eyes, steady and level. "And I'm the owner of the condo, of the accounts, of the trust." Her mouth opened, closed, then curled in a smirk. "Jace is going to love this. You really want to humiliate me like this?" I didn't speak. I just shut the door slow and clean. She stood outside for a while after that. I could hear her footsteps pacing, her voice rising and falling in one-sided arguments with the voicemail on her phone. I waited until her car pulled out of the driveway before I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out the next set of papers. Property title transfers and the formal eviction notice. The sheriff's deputy, Drew, was scheduled to arrive by morning. She came back before noon, this time in slacks and a collared shirt, like she thought dressing the part might undo everything. "Dad, we need to talk," she said as soon as I opened the door. "This is going too far." I let her in. She walked straight to the kitchen like it was still her home. She sat at the table, hands splayed, waiting for me to follow. "You froze everything, the condo, the accounts, even the utilities are in your name. I can't access anything. Jace is threatening to leave if this isn't fixed by tonight." I poured tea into a cup, only one, and sat across from her. "You told me it was temporary," I said. "That it was a bridge, not a highway." She scoffed. "I told you I needed help. You said you'd support me." "I did," I replied, "for over a decade." She leaned back, exasperated. "You think this is how families work? You pull the rug out and expect me to what? Start over? I have responsibilities, clients, a life." I didn't flinch. "You had all of that when you lied about where you were. You told me you were working. You were in Marbella." She looked away. I was decompressing. I needed space. On my dime. Before she could speak again, there was a knock at the front door. I stood and opened it. Deputy Drew tipped his hat. "Sir," he said, "I have those notices." Sienna was already on her feet. "What the hell is this?" "Formal eviction," Drew said, setting the envelope on the counter. "Filed yesterday. You have 48 hours to vacate the property. All items must be removed by then." Sienna's jaw dropped. "You called the police on your own daughter?" "No," I said calmly. "I called the county." Jace arrived moments later, already mid-rant, until Drew handed him a second envelope. Jace's face turned ghost white. "You can't be serious. This is our home." "No," I said again. "It never was." As they argued, I stepped out to the porch and let the screen door close behind me. Inside, the clock ticked louder than before. The next morning, I logged into the trust portal just to verify everything was in place. The account showed frozen status, no movement, no access granted, but then I saw it. An attempted login from an unfamiliar device. flagged under suspicious activity. I clicked into the details. The IP address was local, registered under Jace's name. He had tried to access the secondary trust, the one I'd only mentioned once in passing years ago when he'd asked about future security. He must have taken notes I never realized he was keeping. I forwarded the alert to Nolan. He called within the hour. "We'll add it to the record. It's enough to file for attempted misappropriation." I nodded, the phone warm against my ear. They also listed the Blue Ridge Cabin on Global Stays, a popular vacation rental site. I found the profile. There was a silence on the line, then a slow exhale. "Do you have proof?" They uploaded interior photos with Celeste's antique rocking chair still by the fireplace. I made that chair myself when Sienna was born. Nolan didn't ask how I felt. He knew better than to crowd a wound. "I'll file a cease and desist and prepare a fraud complaint. We'll have a sheriff seal it by tomorrow." That afternoon, I drove out to the cabin with Deputy Drew. The trees were thick and summer green, but the air around me felt colder than it should have. The front door still had my key code, but inside, the scent of someone else's cologne lingered. He placed the county seal across the frame, stepped back, and gave me a nod. "They'll get a copy of the notice in today's mail." We stood on the porch, the silence of the woods pressing in. "This was supposed to be their inheritance," I said, more to myself than to him. He adjusted his hat. "Doesn't mean they were entitled to steal it early, sir." I drove home without music, just the quiet hum of my tires and the weight of what I had finally accepted. My daughter hadn't slipped. She had chosen. And I had finally chosen too. That evening I pulled out the living trust papers. I didn't expect her voice to tremble, but it did. The voicemail arrived at 2:16 a.m. I was already awake, lying in bed with the trust papers open beside me, the ink still fresh on the line where I had signed my name. "Dad," she started, and there was a pause. "I know I messed up. Jace pushed, but I let it happen. I should have been better. I didn't think you'd go this far. You always forgave me. Please don't cut me off completely." Her voice cracked on the last line, then silence. I listened to it once, deleted it, then turned the page in the trust folder. The next morning I met Nolan at his office. He was waiting with a cup of coffee and a quiet look of approval. "You're ready?" he said. "I am." Together we opened the living trust. Sienna's name sat there in the beneficiary line like it always had. Simple, printed, presumptive. I drew a single black line through it, then signed beneath the new name, Nia Evans. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. She was in graduate school now, education, I think. When I first met her, she was a shy intern at the city planning office, eyes always scanning every ledger like she was trying to learn a second language. She once stayed 2 hours late to help me reconcile a missing decimal. After her last day, she sent me a handwritten note. "Thank you for seeing me. Not just as a student, but as someone who could matter." I kept that note in my desk drawer. "She won't expect it," I told Nolan. "She'll honor it," Nolan replied. That afternoon, I made the official filing. We contacted the county to finalize deed reassignments and flagged any future access attempts from Sienna or Jace under legal lock. The trust was sealed, the assets protected, the legacy redirected. And for the first time in years, I went to sleep with no phone beside me, no alerts pending, no what-ifs circling above my bed. By dawn, the sheriff's notice would be posted at the condo. The notice went up on a Thursday morning, sealed to the condo's glass door, printed in bold, "Foreclosure action in effect. Property to be auctioned, BY county order." I didn't need to be there, but I drove past anyway. I parked across the street, stayed in my car. I saw Sienna before she saw me. She stood on the sidewalk reading the notice. Her hands were clenched into fists. Jace paced behind her, phone pressed to his ear, yelling at someone. Maybe a lawyer, maybe his mother. Sienna turned toward the building, then toward nothing. She looked smaller than I remembered, like a child after a tantrum, standing in the mess she made. My phone buzzed. Her name lit the screen. I let it ring. Then came the text. Just one line. "You're destroying me." I sat with it, let the words hang, then typed my reply. "You built this with your choices." She didn't respond. Later that day, a deputy arrived to tag the car in the driveway. The high-end SUV I had co-signed for once upon a time. It would be repossessed along with the condo and sold at auction to repay the debts. A necessary clean sweep. I returned home and brewed a cup of tea. There was nothing left to be done, nothing to undo. My legacy no longer belonged to someone who believed they were owed it. At dusk, I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out an old photo. Celeste holding Sienna as a baby. Both of them squinting into the sun, caught in mid-laugh. I ran my thumb over the corner. Not sadness, just distance, a kind of mourning that had aged into clarity. I slipped the photo back in and retrieved the letter I'd written 2 days ago. It was addressed, stamped, and ready for the mail. Nia's name was printed in blue ink across the front. I would drop it off in the morning. But tonight I sat by the window as the last light faded, watching the wind move through the trees. The text came late, nearly midnight. "Why did you do this to your own daughter?" No greeting, no punctuation, just a sentence heavy with disbelief, not apology. I read it once, then again. The screen glowed cold in my hands, and then I typed, "You did it to yourself." I hit send and deleted the entire thread. Then I removed her contact. There was no satisfaction in it, only silence. But silence can be clean. It can mark the end of something without having to bury it in noise. The next morning I walked to the mailbox and dropped in the letter to Nia. Inside it was a handwritten note and a copy of the trust confirmation, along with a simple sentence. "I chose you not because you needed it, but because you earned it." I imagined her surprise and then her smile. I spent the afternoon tending to the koi pond behind the house. The lilies had bloomed strong and the fish were already feeding. Celeste used to call them my tiny green victories. I liked that. By evening I set 2 cups out on the table. Not for Sienna. Not anymore. Nia arrived just before dusk, breathless and stunned, holding the envelope I'd mailed. "Are you sure?" she asked, voice trembling. I nodded. Legacy is not a blood contract, it's a reflection of values, and you reflect mine. We drank tea, talked about her graduate classes, about the students she wanted to teach someday. She told me she'd never imagined someone like me would choose someone like her. I told her I'd been watching her work long before she ever noticed. And now, it was her turn. That night, as I turned off the lights and locked the doors, I realized there were no more alerts to dread, no balances to check, no lines to cross out. Everything that needed to be frozen had already been sealed, and what remained was mine, quiet, earned, and intact. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.